And yes, we are live now. So, hey folks, this is me, Vishwas Nair. I'm the host of this DevOps chat show. A lot of times I've realized one thing that can somebody give me the real life example of Kubernetes and also something like his journey is very unique. He started his journey in HCL and he really didn't like that and he went back, improvised on himself, and a lot of things changed after he made that decision. So I think I'm very glad Adil Bhai is here. You guys can really learn a lot about something new, about technology every single day. But building the best version of yourself, I think there is a little bit of an gamble that you have to do with yourself. That hey, you know what? At any cost, I'm going to build myself as the best. I think Adil is one of those people that I would look forward to in order to build myself as the best version for tomorrow's world. And thank you so much, Adil Bhai, for being on my show. Means a lot.
Oh, Vishwas, thank you, man. That's a great introduction. I wasn't expecting that. I
Yep.
don't even know how you know all that about me. So, yeah, thank you for that introduction.
Yep. Like, let me just ask you this one question straight up because everybody is going so crazy about Kubernetes. I want to know why is Kubernetes so popular and what's the main reason behind it gaining that popularity? Of course, Google has its own hand, CNCF comes up into the picture. But now, like, why is it so popular in the developer community?
I think there are multiple reasons for that, for it being that popular. The primary, I think, if we break down it into top three, it would be, I think, because it's very stable at scale and it's very customizable, extensible, and also that the community is quite strong. So, I have worked with some older version of Nomad as well, and compared to Kubernetes, the features and the stability was not that good. Kubernetes has tons of features, and the releases are quite frequent. The community is very active, and uh, so yeah, that's one of the major reasons. Uh, Another one that I found is that yeah, so basically you can configure the whole cluster as code via YAML, right? So I think that played an important role in the beginning for picking it up, and then
Yep.
that has been carrying forward because of the future rollouts and the community.
Yeah, like if you ask me, YAML is most vulnerable. Like it's most vulnerable. Even today, you can compromise many things. You can misconfigure many things even today. But to me, yes, I think what it gave us an accessible solution, what it gave us an ease in operating all these aspects, I think that really made the challenge. So I wanted to know what is the difference between a self-hosted and a cloud-managed K8s, and how are they impacting the world of tech? Because a lot of times there is a chance that you can misconfigure, you don't patch the Kubernetes clusters properly or things like that. So what is that difference that you have seen in the self-managed and the cloud-managed clusters?
Well, self-managed and cloud-managed are different in a way that let's say that you want to rent a flat, right? And you could either rent a flat unfurnished or fully furnished. And then when you go to kitchen to cook the food, right, in an unfurnished flat you have to set everything up by yourself, and a fully furnished one, you have everything, you just need to cook the food, bring the grocery in and cook the food, right? So that's I think that's one way of looking at it. So basically in self-managed, you have to set up everything from the beginning, and you should do that only when you have enough people with you who are willing to take that kind of challenge, or if you have an infrastructure small enough that you can do it with few people, because it's not an easy task. So you have to set up everything from storage to control plane to hosts, and then to etcd cluster, everything you have to manage on your own. And if anything goes wrong, you are the one responsible for it. Not only the on the application layer, but also on the cluster layer and the infrastructure layer. Everything is under your hands. So that is why you should only go for it if you have enough skilled personnel with you. whereas whereas the managed Kubernetes cluster, so most of the uh, infrastructure related things are basically taken care by the service provider, right? And all you have to worry about is your own applications and your own requirements. So I think that's the key difference.
Yeah, the challenges are still existing. The challenges are still there. There is no end to the Kubernetes security talk that we are doing. But I wanted to know what is not being evangelized to a greater extent in the Kubernetes security, and what is the missing piece of the puzzle in that entire tech stack that we are talking today, and what is it all about when you are optimizing this kind of a technology today with respect to Kubernetes security?
All right. Do you mean what is missing from what? Can you please elaborate on
What
that
is
a
the
bit?
missing piece of the puzzle in the Kubernetes security, and like what is supposed to be evangelized more in terms of the security aspects?
Uh, well, I think so. Working with smaller and larger clusters, we can see that there's a huge gap in the security aspects there itself, right? And so, depending on the requirement, you can basically uh, keep things into consideration, bring things into consideration, as in if you have a smaller cluster, you don't have to worry about a lot of things that you have to worry about in a larger cluster. And making that switch, you see that when the cluster becomes large, the configuration becomes more complicated, and a lot of vulnerable areas come into place. So you need to be more tight about how you want to control the security, vulnerable places to make the cluster more secure. So in terms of gap, I think if you talk about managed services, the provider provides you most of the security related things uh, for the cloud itself. But inside the cloud, where your application is running, that's where your responsibility comes in to make the cluster more secure. So that's something that cloud provider does not provide you, and I think that's it. That's is what missing when you run a cloud in a managed service, when a Kubernetes cluster in a managed service. So you need to worry about your own images and the security of your images, right? And then how your pods interact with each other, things like that. So uh, and then how you encrypt your data, how you back up your data, all of those things, right? You need to worry about yourself. If you are, yeah, if I think doesn't matter if the cluster is small or large in these things, but yeah, uh, that's that's what missing when you're running a managed cluster.
Yeah, even if if you think to me, I was talking to somebody called as Kavya. If you're watching it, do not comment whatever we talk. But we were talking in terms of like a data scientist perspective, right? She told me something like she is. I forgot the company's name, but they told me one thing that an attacker doesn't have an intuition of what has been developed. He thinks an anti-pattern with respect
Mhm.
to a developer's way, and also even in their production environment where they were talking in terms of Kubernetes pods has their own vulnerability, right? Think about the impact which an entire Kubernetes cluster can bring on the table. That is more bigger and challenging than whatever we are thinking today. So yeah, I think that's the whole point that Kubernetes is also there. But I wanted to know. Uh, yes, I think probably he's stuck. I think this is live show. Anything can go wrong, right? Not a problem about that. But I wanted to talk regarding until he comes back, and if he is not able to come back, can you? Are you able to hear me, bro? Hello, hello. All right, until he comes back to us, there is a fundamental challenge in the Kubernetes that is not just the way in which you can misconfigure it, but there are ways in which you can really go ahead and explore what is happening inside the entire production environment. So it keeps changing. So there is blue green deployment, there is canary deployment. Of course, in build piper, the one which the build piper has, there is canary deployment templates. You can still work on them, but there is things beyond it. I think Adil is back. So can you hear me? Hello.
There's some problem with my network. I don't understand. It was
Yeah,
working
yeah. What
fine
you
a
can
few minutes ago, but now it's
you can
acting
rejoin.
erratic.
Not a problem. Rejoin. Rejoin. That's not a problem.
Yeah, yeah. I'll just go and rejoin. Yeah, just give me one
Yep.
minute.
Sure, sure. Until he comes back, it's just the simple approaches. So it just keeps changing. It just keeps changing from one company to another. Companies which are well furbished, and there are a lot of ways. It takes them 2 months to even talk about. Most of the time just goes in talking and strategizing where it has to happen. But it's not the same when it comes to a startup. It's something like if Jenkins is found vulnerable within a week, they're supposed to migrate out from that entire deployment strategy. So they will experience a downtime, but ಇದ್ದೆ ಅಂತ ನನಗೂ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಒಂದು 5 ನಿಮಿಷ. Yeah, that's how it is. Challenges come up, challenges go out there. So in a meanwhile, you think of the scaling platforms are pretty huge, pretty humongous in terms of like the impact that it is getting. That means I'm saying you like, and startup can really have an humongous shift in the mindset, and also there can be a lot of changes that can be going down in their entire infrastructure stack and everything. So make sure that you have realized what is that infrastructure stack that you are supposed to be like maintaining and everything. So it's changing the perspectives. It's always the changing ways in which, yep, the strategies are working, and we can go ahead.
Hey,
So
can you hear me now, Vishwas?
yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Sorry about that, man. I don't understand what happened. It
Yeah,
was
yeah,
working
happens.
fine one moment.
Anything can go wrong in live shows.
Yeah.
so, so
Yeah, it's
today,
my
today
it's
there
my
is
first
a
live show.
live show.
So yeah,
Can't help
I'm
it.
yeah.
Yeah, can't help
I
that.
think
Yeah, it
yeah, I'm not
happens.
that well prepared, but okay. Yes, let's
Yep,
go
not
ahead.
a
Yeah.
problem, not a problem. So when should one pick CSPM, and when should one pick an native tool? Like in terms of CSPM, you can have good amount of cloud security posture management tools, but there are ways in which CNCF is also coming up with new strategies in their entire project base that they are funding. There are graduated CNCF projects. So when should one really go ahead with all these kind of strategies with respect to picking the right fit for their problem state?
Uh, okay, so in my personal experience, I'd say that I don't have much experience with it, right? But from what I have talked about in communities and what I have read, I'd say that when you have a configuration complex enough, right? Uh, then I think native tool won't be a good choice, right? So if you have large enough infrastructure, then people mostly go with the CSPM tools, and because the more complex infrastructure is, the more people are involved, the more things get, uh, the more there's more, the prone to error more basically, more human error, more misconfigurations can take place. So that's when people go with CSPM. In a smaller architecture, smaller infrastructure, I haven't seen people using those tools much. So that's what I suggest. Yeah.
Yeah, like there is a lot of things. There's policy as code, and there is a lot of things that are coming up. But scaling to multiple K8 clusters it's a huge challenge. Starting a K8 security today is also a bigger challenge. So how should an organization start approaching that kind of a problem statement, which says, approach it in the right way? This is going to be a killer. That's what Kubernetes security strategies are all about. Like every organization has a different strategy for it. So how should an organization start today? And also when we talk regarding the multiple clusters, how should an organization approach that?
Okay. Yeah, so in terms of security, do you mean how should I approach in terms of security while scaling to multiple clusters?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So well, first of all, scaling to multiple clusters. So uh, should be done only when there is a specific need to do that, right? So because even one cluster can scale horizontally to a massive scale, and uh, yeah, and you can have different sort of policies and abstractions in place to basically isolate your different service environments and even create different environments, right? So I think if you are scaling to multiple clusters, then there's a specific need to do so depending on infrastructure. And when we're doing that, then I think the security considerations will be same as those that we have in single cluster, but on a larger scale, it would be right on larger view. So basically, uh, the two clusters when they're communicating, right? So the communication needs to be handled via proper network policies, and they should be such that there should be no redundant ports or IP addresses should be exposed to anything. It should be like clear communication, encrypted one, right? So it's the TLS encrypted communication between the two clusters, or more than two clusters, whatever that is. The IP configuration and yeah, the should be taken care in that it should be inside a private network, not basically a public one, obviously. But apart from that, security considerations come into multiple layers actually. So it's not like only on that one. So if you have been, you have to consider uh, the security considerations on the host level, and then on the cluster level, and also when the application is running, so on the container level, right? On the application level. So all these things should be taken care. So when you're adding new clusters to your environment, you should make sure that the image when you're building it, the CI part, you should make sure that the images are secure, they are lightweight, and they should not be vulnerable. They should not run on with the root accounts. That if a hacker gets access to, let's say,
Yeah,
a root account, then they'll be able to communicate to various other places in your cluster, and do things that you don't want them to do, right?
that's
So
true.
that, yeah. So apart from that, we should also have TLS encryption, so our secrets should be encrypted, things like that. Should keep in mind,
So
right?
now my question is all simple, like because we have a lot of strategies which are coming up, right? We have a lot of strategies which are coming up with respect to monitoring and Kubernetes cluster, like in terms of cost, in terms of setting it downtime. There is a lot of research going on in terms of unused resources, right? Companies pay a lot because they don't know what's going down in their Kubernetes cluster sometimes. That's what the biggest challenge is. So monitoring and observability in a Kubernetes cluster. So how are companies approaching it? So because I wanted to know, because there is a lot of difference between EKS, AKS, and the GKE that we are seeing today. That means like everything has an own flavor of security to it. Everything has been managed by a cloud service provider, and to an extent, it's more secure comparatively to the self-management. So how are the monitoring and the observability strategy working out? Because there are tools like SaaS based tools, not tools like SaaS based tools are coming up with their own YAML configuration. If there are some secrets out, they will say that and things like that. So how is it all about when we are strategizing observability and monitoring today?
Well, so observability and monitoring basically are very key aspects of an infrastructure, actually, because so I have also worked in an environment where they don't have that, and we had set it up, and we also worked in an environment where it has been very tightly knit into the infrastructure. And if we compare both of them, we'll see that when you do have monitoring in place, there's a lot less, running around in panic with your hands flaring in the air, right? Would you understand? So there's a lot less uh, scenarios where you have to react to certain things, right? And you have to leave the work you are doing and just to tend to things which are going wrong. So that's what the primary purpose of monitoring is actually, so that you can take preventive measures rather than reactive ones. Uh, so yeah, if we talk about Kubernetes cluster, that's what we have in mind when we are trying to monitor a cluster like that. So there are different aspects to monitoring as well. Obviously, because if we go in deep enough, the things start keep dividing into different classes, right? So while monitoring the Kubernetes cluster, we have the cluster itself, the control plane that we have to monitor. We have to monitor deployments, and then we have to monitor pods, and the nodes, underlying nodes, also we have to monitor, right? But the most important thing that I have seen that we do need to keep in mind is so we need to look out for the resource consumption on the hosts, because that is cause of deployment failure a lot of times and very common. Disk usage is one of them that we need to keep in mind. In control plane, we need to keep an eye on the basically there's QAPI server running, right? And it's very important that it stays healthy and it has all the resources it requires. We need to monitor the latency there, and how many requests are coming in and out, how many requests are being served. If there's any discrepancy or any changes in that, we need to look out for that. We need to identify problems and fix them and alert on the basis of that, right? We have to make sure that the uh, pod specification or deployment specification that we have matches the one that we have specified, right? So we can alert based on that. There are metrics that monitor that those things. So that is an important aspect also for monitoring.
Yeah, when
Yeah.
I see tools which are coming up, I think probably there's a huge demand in not the private tools, but for the open source tools, because we still rely on open source and it's still being managed to a greater extent. So now my last question is very simple. So skilling up teams with respect to the service mesh and the Kubernetes clusters, and also there is a lot of K8s as a need for a service mesh, right? That means that really set a new standard in which we are utilizing Kubernetes potentials. So service mesh came into the picture. So does K8 need service meshes, and also skilling up teams with respect to the service mesh as well as the Kubernetes aspect? So what is the biggest challenge today?
All right. Kubernetes. So it depends, and of course, it needs a service mesh. I mean, uh, the basically method that we follow with the security is that we need to be redundant in terms of how many uh, security uh, processes we apply to our infrastructure. So, if you have already have, let's say, that your cluster is already TLS encrypted and you have network policies in place and your images are secure and you have all the backups ready, even then if you want to implement a service mesh on top of that, I'd say go ahead, why not, right? Especially in production environment, you can't be too safe, right? So if the question is do we need it, so of course we do need it, but then it also depends on who is do, who basically is going to make that decision, and if they are willing to take the risk or not of not implementing. So also service mesh basically makes a lot of jobs quite easier apart from security as well. So there are a lot of things to consider when deploying a pod in a service. And apart from the business logic that the code has, there are a lot of other logics on the network layer, and basically a service mesh implementation like Istio can take care of that quite easily, the infrastructure logics. And then basically uh, mm, people can focus more on the business logic and the scaling logics as well, requirements based on what the application is, based on application, not infrastructure. They can focus more on that. Yeah. So, so
Yeah. Yeah, because today I see that there is a huge demand in the STO market. I think Kiali is also doing pretty awesome. I think there is a lot of integration. So, yeah, I think educating teams is a biggest challenge. There is a biggest opportunity for all the people who wants to learn Kubernetes. I think the documentation is not good enough to actually learn everything that is required. Probably you are supposed to go back to an expert who has worked on some of these aspects, discuss with them. I think yeah, Syed is one of them. Just go ahead, ask them what is that supposed to be learning component in a Kubernetes, because there is a lot. And even Syed has been working a lot on Kubernetes and other things, but even till today, he probably will say that I don't know much, because Kubernetes is humongous, by the way. And I think thank you so much, Syed, not Sadil, it's Syed. Thank you so much for
You
being on
can
the
call me
show.
either of those names. Actually, people have called me in the past. Though. So yeah, my middle name is actually my real name, which is very
Adil.
confusing to a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I know it's Adil. So Adil is the better one. So Adil, thank you so much for being on the show. Means a lot, brother. I think we can end the broadcast. This is Vishwas Nayan, folks, signing off from this live show. And